Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I have a book review from a brand new kids horror series called Eek, Tales to Scare You Silly. Now, this series is written by Jeff Strand. The first book recently came out in 2024, and I picked it up at Walmart at a discounted price. You can go out and find this book in your Barnes & Nobles, in your Books A Millions as well, if you can't find it at Walmart. And the book in question is It Watches in the Dark. Now, there is no numbers on the spine or anything. How you can tell it's an Eek book or part of the Eek series is down here on the bottom left of the front cover, and it tells you on the back here. And this cover art here that you can see, this amazing cover art, is done by a gentleman named David Seidman. And he has to be one of my new favorite cover artists in the game right now. I mean, look at this cover art. It is absolutely awesome, with the river being the Scarecrow's arm here, and then the smoke from the chimney being his arm. It just looks so cool. I have to give it to Seidman here for making such quality artwork for this. And I have to say, as somebody who's not familiar with Jeff Strand's adult horror books or young adult books that he has out there, I was honestly surprised with the quality of this. I went into this not knowing much other than kind of looking at the back blurb and being like, okay, this is like a Scarecrow story. Let's see what he's able to do with this. And I was pleasantly surprised because for a kid's horror book, this has to be one of the most disturbing books I've read in the genre thus far. I mean, this book has all the typical qualities that make great kids horror books in it, but it also has those qualities that most series don't ever go down. And I think maybe why this is able to be what it is from having an author who has a background in adult horror coming into kids horror. And I know my good friend BD Horror, who goes by the Horror Tavern now, has mentioned in the past that he thinks that adult horror authors would make great kids horror writers if they would just give it a shot. And I have to tip my hat to Jeff Strand here for making a book around a character or a subgenre of horror like Scarecrow horror, something kind of refreshing in a genre that, quite frankly, needs a little boost in some quality and creativity. If I had to recommend this book to you all, I will. I mean, I wholeheartedly would urge you to go buy this immediately and give it a shot. I think some scenes in this book will shock you. Some of the emotions are very raw in this. And what you see happen to characters is actually genuinely unnerving. In not the typical kids horror fashion. So yeah, go get this book if you don't own this already, okay? So with that out the way, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with a pair of twins and their father. They're out on a canoe trip out somewhere in the Midwest. They're kind of isolated out in the middle of nowhere. And the two kids are Trisha and Oliver, and they're a set of fraternal twins. I think in the book they had just turned 12 years old, and they're both kind of polar opposites. Oliver, he is a whiz kid. He loves video games. He kind of lives in a fantasy world. He's that kind of kid. And then Trisha, she's like athletic, kind of sporty, muscular, fit. And they couldn't quite possibly be farther apart from each other in terms of personalities. Well, almost immediately, as they're in this canoe trip with their dad, there's a tragic accident on the river that causes the canoe to tip, and there's this whole ordeal with Oliver and Trisha trying to find each other and, of course, find their father. But when they find their father, he's been knocked unconscious. He's bruised and bloodied up from the currents racking him around, and they manage to make it ashore nearby this dock, which looks kind of abandoned. There's like this rowboat with like cobwebs all over it, and they figure that there has to be some population nearby this, and unfortunately for them, they're going to have to leave their dad parked in this canoe to go get help in this town if they can find one. And what they end up doing is they go through this township and they end up finding a house, and this house is belonged by this gentleman named Frank, and Frank is very weird and odd. There's something off about him. He makes some like offhanded remarks about, hey, don't worry, kids, I'm not going to kill you or anything. And the kids are like, that's kind of weird, but we have no choice but to go to this guy for help. And of course, he recruits another nearby patron to go grab some help to go get their father. And they're basically left in the care of Frank while all this is going down. And there's this whole thing about Frank wanting to play jacks with them, but he doesn't have jacks and he can't remember why. And the kids are like, this is very odd. There's something off about this guy. So why don't we go look into town to see if maybe there's like a hotel, or maybe we can go to the hospital and stay there and see what they have to offer there. But as the story goes on, the kids, they go into town with Frank, and the first thing they see in the town square is this giant scarecrow. And the scarecrow catches them off guard immediately. And they're talking about the scarecrow, how it looks kind of dumb. And this upsets Frank, and he basically leaves them there, scolds them, kind of gives some rude remarks to them, and leaves them defenseless. And the kids are like, okay, that was strange. What's going on with this? And then they're waiting for information on their dad from the mayor, who's been told to them by this other woman who is running a diner that, while they wait for the mayor's deliberation and, feedback on what's going on with their father, they can come and eat some food. And the kids are kind of hungry. They eat some hamburgers and French fries there. But when the woman brings out some ice cream to give to them, they said, oh, we can't eat it. And the woman essentially gets angry with them and says, you kids, you're ungrateful. We have to make this stuff from scratch. We're not like big city people that get all this stuff handed to them. We're pretty isolated out here. We put blood, sweat, and tears into everything we make. And around here, if you don't eat all your food, that's a sign of disrespect. And the kids are like, you know what, lady, you're kind of whacked. And they try to eat the ice cream. They try to tell her that they were trying to be nice, but the lady's like, you know what, get out of my establishment. So the kids are kicked out of the establishment, and they're like, okay, what are we doing wrong here? Like, they can't quite pinpoint why these people don't like them, right? Well, it comes to a point where they have this interaction with the mayor. And the mayor is this jolly old frumper, and he's kind of explaining this town of Escrow, and he's talking to them about, the ideals and what they expect out of people. They don't get many outsiders here. That's what they call people that aren't, citizens of the town in the book. So when people come here, it's kind of like a culture shock for many. That's why they don't send people out to the outside world often to go get supplies, like I guess like electrical supplies or some things that the town just can't produce by themselves. So it's a learning curve thing for them, and the kids are like, well, we want to go into the hospital and to see our dad. And the mayor's like, nah, that's not a good idea. I kind of recommend that you guys go sit on the bench in front of the scarecrow and have the scarecrow, come to you. And there's this whole prophetic thing about how the town looks to the scarecrow for protection, or maybe as some religious symbol. And the kids are like, okay, this is odd, but why not? Why not give in to what the mayor is saying? I guess everybody else is upset that we aren't going about, abiding by their customs and what they believe in. So why don't we try this? So the kids go up to the benches, and they're sitting down, and they're just staring at the scarecrow, and both of them start to get talked to telepathically by the scarecrow. And the scarecrow is very creepy, y'all. Some things that the scarecrow is telling these kids are pretty frightening. With Oliver, he's breaking through to Oliver, trying to get him to, come clean about his emotions with his sister and trying to get him to do stuff. And then Trisha, I think that's her name, gets talked to by the scarecrow. And Trisha is like saying out loud to her brother, like, hey, this is off. And the scarecrow is like, you know what? I don't think I like you, Trisha. You're not open-minded. You guys are probably going to be a problem, and I'll have to deal with you later. So the kids, they're like, this is too strange. They're getting hassled by another woman who's trying to meditate with the scarecrow nearby them. So they decide to go back to the hospital and tell the mayor, hey, we sat down with the scarecrow. Can we see our father? So the mayor kind of agrees reluctantly because he believes that they actually did speak with it. So they go in the hospital, and they see their dad put up into a bunch of wires. That doesn't look like a traditional hospital machine. As a matter of fact, there's no windows in this hospital. There's just fluorescent lighting everywhere. And the kids immediately think that something is wrong. But there's this doctor there named Belinda who kind of assures them that she's a medical professional. She's licensed. She knows what she's doing. She went to medical school, you know, with the outsiders out there in the real world. So she knows what she's doing. But meanwhile, there's nothing else going on in the town. So the mayor and the only hospital worker just hang out there with the dad. And the kids are like, something is off here. And they try to corner the mayor about it. And the mayor's like, look, we have 999 citizens here exactly. They're all law-abiding. We have very few bad apples. And when we do, we handle them accordingly. And he's given hints to them saying, you better not mess up or you're going to get some punishments that you don't want to see happen. So the kids are like, okay, maybe we should take this guy seriously. And he tells them that because it's about to be nighttime, it's not safe to be out once dark hits because the Scarecrow doesn't like it, and it's a town precautionary thing that everybody is in their beds with the doors locked and they don't leave their homes. So he has them shack up with this very old 95-year-old woman for the night. And the 95-year-old woman gives them bad food and tells them, you know, I only have 3 rules. You got to be very quiet in the house while I'm asleep because I'm a light sleeper. Second thing is, you know, you can't steal from me because I keep track of all my stuff. And the third thing is you must not go outside. She keeps trying to reinforce to these kids, give them a warning. Hey, don't go outside. It's not safe. So the kids are like, we don't trust any of these people at this point because they think that something is very off with the treatment of their father. They think that all these people are kind of like spying on them, observing them as these outsiders, and they have this passive aggressiveness towards them. So they engineer an escape anyway to go break their dad out of the hospital to take him back to the canoe, and they'll take their chances down the river somewhere else. Well, they manage to escape, but when they make it to the town square, the Scarecrow's not there. He's out and about, and the Scarecrow notices them that they're outside. And essentially, this plays up into this whole big scene where the Scarecrow is chasing them around, right? And is taunting them, saying, you can't hide from me. I know where you are. And he's like playing mind games with them. And the 2 kids, they try desperately to, you know, get into the hospital. They managed to do so because early on, Trisha, I kind of skimmed over this, managed to steal the mayor's keys after giving him a hug. And they get into the hospital. They have this attempt where they try to break into the room, knock Belinda unconscious or tie her up so they can unplug their father. And Belinda, the doctor, is sitting there taunting them, saying, I want to do that if I were you. Your dad's going to bleed out if you take all those tubes out. So the kids are like, all right, fine. They come up with an agreement with Belinda and they leave. But once they leave, the Scarecrow is after them, chasing them around. And there's a whole thing where they're trying to essentially run from the town square, and the Scarecrow starts picking them up. They find some fragmented glass from like a pseudo-abandoned building nearby, and they start stabbing the Scarecrow in the face, start stabbing its leg to, you know, try to rip it and, you know, get at it a little bit. But the Scarecrow doesn't seem to like it, and he essentially picks these kids up and throws them around like rag dolls, and they both land on a roof. Oliver almost dies narrowly, but he was saved by like a gutter. And he and his sister get off the roof. They try to break for the woods. They're like, screw it. We're just going to go get help from a nearby town, get the authorities, and they're going to come forcefully take our dad out of this town because this is just really wrong. But the Scarecrow manages to stop them. They lose their canoe. These kids have cell phones because this book is a 2024 book. They lose their cell phones in the altercation as well. And the Scarecrow essentially corners them back to the town square and says, you're going to sleep here, and we'll find out what to do with you in the morning. So the kids reluctantly have to sit there and, you know, trade off sleep because the Scarecrow like turns itself off, I guess, right above them because he knows that everything's okay. But by the time the morning hits, half of the town comes out with the mayor and Belinda, the doctor. They come out into the square, and they're like, what have you done to the Scarecrow? He's our protector. You must get punishment. And all these women come up to repair the damages on the Scarecrow, and the mayor is coming up with an idea to punish them. And he's like, sending you to the town jail would be too easy of a punishment. And he goes, I know that you're kids, but you need to be taught a lesson, not for just you, but for everyone here in case they act up. So they take him to this location called the Hills. And I'm not kidding. This happens in this book. Their punishment, when they get there, they're going to be lathered in honey and put onto posts tied up, and these red ants are going to crawl up their bodies and bite them essentially to death while being covered in honey. And they actually start that process, and these ants start biting these two kids. Well, the doctor comes in and says, you need to stop this. They're kids. The Scarecrow told me to stop this. If it was, my will, I would let them just be fed to the ants. But he has a different plan for them. So the mayor's like, okay, well, we can't disobey the Scarecrow's wishes. Let's go back to town and figure out what the plan is. So they spend the rest of the day kind of just waiting around for the Scarecrow to say something. Well, by the time it gets to nightfall, the kids haven't eaten all day or anything, and we learn more context about why the 999 townspeople are a thing. It's because if they go any further than that, that's too many people for the Scarecrow to watch, and he starts to get kind of hungry, and there's some sacrifices involved, and a few townsfolk, at least within a reasonable amount of generations that exist in this current state of the town, have had to become sacrifices to keep the Scarecrow happy. So it's kind of messed up and warped. Well, the Scarecrow, it's revealed once it hits nighttime that he's going to perform the punishments on them himself. And essentially, this plays into the final act of the story, where the two kids now are in the fight of their lives against this Scarecrow. And let's just say Oliver literally gets eaten by this thing. There's a character that we saw in the story that literally dies because the Scarecrow just yeets her into death. That was insane. And Trish, she's kind of forced to go around the town and be resourceful, find some things, and use it to get her brother out of the Scarecrow body, which may or may not succeed. Now, in doing so, they managed to find a place with like a gas oven, and they put some stuff, they turn it on, they put some flammable stuff on there, hopefully to lure the Scarecrow into the building to catch it on fire, which may or may not succeed, and something happens to the Scarecrow. Well, once this starts happening, all these townfolk come out into the town, and they're witnessing what's happening to the Scarecrow, and they're all like, what have you done? He was our protector, right? And then we find out what exactly the Scarecrows were protecting them from. And let's just say there's some giant birds. And we see more people get taken off into their deaths, which happen off screen, or I guess off page in this book, because this is a kid's book. It doesn't go too far with it, but that's to be implied. And the kids manage to get enough distractions out there to go finally take their father off all those tubes, and they manage to take him back to the river line where the story started for them. And luckily for them, their canoe had washed up not too far away from where they were. They managed to get back into their canoe, and the story ends off kind of on a copacetic note. Like they just went through this whole harrowing ordeal, but anything coming to them moving forward is probably going to be better than what just happened. So that's essentially what you're going to expect out of It Watches in the Dark. So yeah, let's get off with the positives with this story. Off the bat, the main characters, Trisha and Oliver, while the story is entirely third person, these characters do have distinct personalities, and throughout the story, these kids are tempted with some things. And I only skimmed the surface level because I don't want to give away all the good juices that you'll come across in this book. But they are basically tempted by the Scarecrow at certain points of the story in some dark ways, y'all. Like this Scarecrow might be trying to convince them at various points to kill each other and fight with each other because he gets some sadistic pleasure out of that. This villain really brings out these characters in some of the best ways because they have to resent the Scarecrow and go against what it wants, and they just come off super heroic and super badass in the process. And I have to tip my hat to them. They might not have the richest monologue, they might not be the most developed characters with intriguing backstory or empathy, but you can definitely empathize with their situation, and especially what they're given in the story. they came out on top. And I'm actually shocked by how resourceful and how smart these kids were. So this was refreshing to have some active protagonists in a kid's horror book that actually can handle the situation, which is really nice. The Scarecrow. I'm telling y'all, this Scarecrow in this book has to be one of the best kids' horror villains of all time. Not only that, I would honestly say the cult of townspeople that worship this thing, they are demented, y'all. They are some sadistic people. The mayor in this book, that punishment with the anthill and the honey, that was insane. The Scarecrow himself, we already touched on what he was trying to convince the siblings to do to each other, but he straight up killed somebody in the book. That's insane. And also what he tried to do to Oliver in the climax, he essentially tried to eat him. Super threatening villain. And he's mind gaming. He's able to telepathically communicate with you, get in your mind. He's literally just messing with them and trolling them because he knows, or it knows, that they can't do anything to him. At least in the moment, because they haven't come up with the idea yet. And he was honestly great. The setting of this town called Escrow, there's just something off about it. Now, the Prowse doesn't really set up the atmosphere all that much. You can kind of imply it's a woodland town, maybe like a small mountain town or something like that has a river source where they get their water and stuff. But there's just something off the entire read. And that carries the tension throughout the entire story. The tension is wound very tight here. The intrigue, there's even like, a mystery going on about, at least in terms of being the reader, of what exactly is the thing with these people and the Scarecrow, and you're wondering what it's going to lead to by the end. So it keeps you glued to the page. So yeah, this town was eerie. The tension was wound tight. I will say some of the action sequences in this book literally played out like a movie. Like these are some movie things that these kids are dealing with and having to, navigate this giant Scarecrow, which I think is taller than a 2-story house. And they're like taking sharp objects and ripping at it and trying desperately with all the energy they have to make it out alive. There's just so much desperation and stakes invoked in this story that you really feel at all times like something bad can happen at any point. You don't really know if both of these characters are going to make it because of how sinister all this stuff is coming across. You get this. I got the sense that Jeff Strand was not afraid to do something to these characters if he really wanted to, and that's a testament to his writing because he made it so eclectic and so unpredictable at times that you were wondering, who's really safe in the story. And I have to tip my hat to him. I mean, he did a fantastic job at that. And I will say this. One last positive to get before we get into some negatives that were detractions, unfortunately. This book flew by. Now, it's not the most Prowse heavy thing. I'm not going to deduct anything on this because this is a mild negative. It's not the most Prowse engaging thing ever where it's like super descriptive or anything. Everything is kind of being told to you instead of being, shown to you via the words and the imagery. But what it does excel at is its pace. I mean, this has some of the best pacing ever that I've read in a kid's horror book. And like I said, man, like you just got to you got to try this out to get what I'm saying, because for a 220-page book, this is a bit bigger in font size than your average Goosebumps book, for example. I mean, that's not a lot of, words or text on the page itself for how tall this book is. This would probably be like 180 pages, maybe 190 pages if it was a Goosebumps thing. But this read better than some 100-page Goosebumps books. And that's saying something here. So yeah, I mean, the quality here is magnificent. And it's a very fun ride. Not so much the destination, which we're now getting into the negatives. The destination is really where this book mildly fell apart, but it's not the biggest thing ever. I'm going to get this off my chest. The biggest thing that I was wondering throughout the whole book is, what exactly is the origin or what motivates the power of this scarecrow. Because the whole story, you're putting aside disbelief, right? That you have these cult townspeople worshiping the scarecrow. Apparently, the scarecrow has some origins that go back to the town's beginnings or possibly even further. And you're like, okay, well, let's see what it offers. And the story just never takes its time to build on that. It's just in there. And I guess if you're looking at it from a lens, I can totally understand from the perspective of a writer. Like if you're writing adult horror, like Jeff Strand usually does, sometimes not giving away everything helps the intrigue and the mystique of it all, right? And I can totally see that artistic thing here, but where it fails to correlate is also with a two-pronged negative here, and that is where the story ends up. Throughout the whole story, you have this cult worshiping this scarecrow, and I'm like, okay, maybe there's like this metaphorical thing where the town people, they sacrifice a person whenever they get too many people in their population. They make these sacrifices to have safety, and maybe you can tie this metaphorically to safety from the outside world, because maybe they are some sort of, you can kind of put this on like a, I don't know, like any type of group that lives off the grid from normal society. They like isolation, they like their way of life, and the scarecrow kind of represents what they want, right? I thought that was where they were going to go with, because in the story, the scarecrow seems to have like a skeleton. I'm like, okay, so maybe they're going this whole magic route where they created the scarecrow out of magic or something. But we get to the reveal. Once we find out what happens to the scarecrow, we figure out who he's protecting the town from. And it's literally, and I'm not kidding, y'all, I kind of already talked about it. I might as well go into a little more depth here. They're giant crows. Okay, so they created the scarecrow to be the protector of giant crows that come out at night that can feast on the people. Okay, that's fine. How does the scarecrow have magic abilities? How does it... What? It's so left field, and it's almost kind of corny that it made me chuckle when I read it, and I'm like, okay. And the crows do some things to the townspeople that are fun, but I'm just like, I would not have gone that direction choice personally. And I just don't feel like that direction really answers all the mystique and intrigue about the scarecrow early on. But I do see the impact that it has when it's not there for the people. So I guess it kind of works, but it did kind of irk me. And it just, where it ended was not the neat bow I thought the story was going to go. And I'm not trying to say that, oh, I didn't think it was going to go this route, thus I hate it. No, I liked certain aspects about it, but I wish there was more there involving, the town sacrifice stuff. To me, the human sacrifice, feeding the scarecrow when he's hungry, making the scarecrow this, like, demented villain who's bored with his existence because all he does is, scare off giant crows. When you get that recontextualization, you're like, it's kind of like a whatever thing. I know I'm sound like I'm rambling there, but I mean, that's just how it comes across. I don't know. Maybe y'all will like it more than me when you read it. I hope you do read it, but those were really the only two things. And they're not the biggest things ever, y'all. And as a matter of fact, because the scarecrow was so scary and because the story was willing to go balls to the wall at points, I was a bit lenient on those things. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I gave this story a 4.7 out of 5 stars, and I only deducted 0.3 for those issues. Honestly, this book was fantastic. Held back by some mild things for me. I might be able to forgive them as years go on, maybe when I reread this book at some point or when I think back on it. But as of now, I feel comfortable putting this book here. Y'all need to go pick this book up for your collections or just to try it. Eek looks like a series with promise, and that's the glimmer of hope that I'm looking for in kids' horror these days, especially with these new series coming out, trying to put out content next to Goosebumps. I'm hoping that Jeff Strand in this Eek book series can last past 4 books or 5 books and break the 4-book curse and, become a successful franchise. Honestly, like I said, this story possibly could be a movie of how well told it was. So, yeah, really love this. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on It Watches in the Dark. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love it or do you hate it? I'm dying to know. and I'll see you next time.